Okay, good morning everyone. Before we begin, question. Well, I guess that is the beginning point. It's not before, it's my point. Never mind. Who can tell me the due date of assignment 2 for this module? The 7th of what? November. How do you know that? You looked. Extraordinary abilities to conceive and understand the requirements of the course. So, you should all have, as part of the phenomenal series of applications that the university gives you and expects you to understand like this, you should all have a calendar. Is this true? Yes. Oh, I see a lot of people like, oh, I don't know. You all have calendar. In that calendar, the assessment system automatically populates all of your due dates. Okay? So, if you go into it at some point today, scroll forward to the week starting the 6th of November, which is study week. You will see on the 7th, which is a Tuesday, 2 p.m. is a deadline for your assessment. And that will get populated every time an assessment is added to one of your modules. So if you're unsure when you need to submit things, it will always be in the calendar, it will always be automatically added to whatever module you're on. Now, here is a thing. There are some people in this room who are not going to submit their work on the 7th of November. Okay? Some of you, this will be because you automatically have extensions due to dyslexia or receiving support of some kind, and so that is already something I hopefully you've already got sorted out if you're in that category of people. And that's great, no problem. However, some of you will encounter between now and the 7th of November some kind of unmitigated disaster. Like, one of your flatmates is going to get absolutely shit-faced one night out, set off all the fire alarms and fire extinguishers and the stuff. You're going to have to get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, be out of your flat until 9 o'clock the next morning. You're not going to have time to do it because you planned on doing the assignment at 4 o'clock in the morning and handing it in that afternoon. It's your business how you manage your time. It's not for me to decide, right? And this will be an entire shit show and things will happen. Or like, you've spent lots of money on a nice Apple laptop, for example, and fine. Okay, and that's a big problem. This is a piece of advice for everyone who's in those circumstances. And it's going to sound awful, and it's not as if I don't have empathy for that situation, but don't email me. I have no power whatsoever to affect deadlines. Okay? Don't do it. All I will do is send you an email back saying I can't help with this. If you need to apply for an extension to a deadline, there is a form that you need to fill in. It's a very simple one. I think it's like 3 boxes. And you find it on the School of Culture and Communication hub on Canvas. So go onto Canvas, hit that button for the School of Culture and Communication hub. So 3 or 4 boxes down on that page, there is an extenuating circumstances section. Click on it, it will take you to a Microsoft Forms page. You fill in your details, it goes straight to the people who make those decisions, and they should be able to adjudicate that decision within 24 hours. Just don't waste your time emailing anyone else because we can't help. That power was taken away from lecturers 20 years ago. Okay, so we can't help that. So, we are approaching deadline for assessment 2, first written piece of work to be submitted for your degree. I've had one person so far, she's not here, but I've had one person so far who has submitted a draft of that assignment to me for feedback. I have corrected it for her. She redid it based on my corrections, submitted it back. You'll get first. Yeah, I'll get about 75 now on the basis of that. So the moral of this story is, if you want me to read your work before you submit it and give you feedback before you have submitted, so it will be better when you do submit. You can do that at any point before 2 p.m. on the 6th of November, 24 hours before the due date. The reason why I don't do it, feedback within 24 hours of the due date is 2 reasons. One, if there's a lot of feedback to be given, you don't have time to do it. And 2, I just tend to get loads on that day and I get overwhelmed. So I would much prefer if people actually give me a bit of time to do it. Do we have any questions about any of that? No? Fantastic. Okay. We finally start doing stuff today on this module. 3 weeks of plowing through stuff that nobody else wants to do because they think it's beneath them is over. And now we get to do things. And we're going to start with this image. Who in this room can tell me what this is an image of? Matthew. Uncle Sam. And who is Uncle Sam, Matthew?
He's a propaganda figure.
Couldn't put it any better myself. Uncle Sam is a propaganda figure used in the United States as an enlisting tool for the United States Armed Forces, in particular the United States Army. Uncle Sam is a creation that is used to persuade young people in the United States that your government and your country needs you, hence the pointing finger. Uncle Sam is a representation. Images are representations. They are representations of something in particular. Every image is a representation of something. In fact, images, as we'll see in week 8 or 9, I can't remember now, are polysemic. They can be representations of different kinds of things, depending on our perspective. This is a fairly simple image which represents one thing, and what it represents is an ideological position. Any ideas what that ideology is here? Okay, well, let's take it back a second. What's an ideology? Anyone know? Superb. I love it.
It's like what everyone wants to be, or like the the end goal of like a propaganda model, or whether it's like, does that make sense?
It
Like
does make
Sam,
sense.
for example, he's meant to be like the American to look up to because he's like patriotic and strong, and he's like a leader. So he wants people to follow him.
We've got loads of stuff to unpack in that answer. Patriotic, strong, leadership. These are all instantiations of a particular ideological position. Okay. Ideology is a difficult thing to get to grips with, but it's actually a very simple term. An ideology is an idea or set of ideas held by a particular class of people in society. So an ideological position is a position held by a particular group of people in society. Now, Uncle Sam is a representation of a particular ideology. Therefore, it's the representation of a particular set of ideas of a group of people in American society. Any guesses as to who? The American military. Oh, yes, that's pretty fair. And is the American military important in American society? Oh, yeah. In American society, a particularly militaristic society, the military is incredibly important. It is, in fact, an ideology of a ruling elite in American society. American society is structured in a particular way, and the ideology of the military is a very important part of the top of that structural hierarchy of society. Therefore, Uncle Sam, as a representation, embodies a number of important ideologies of a ruling class in American society. And those ideological positions, like strength, willingness to serve government, etc., military power, I mean, let's be fair, if you're going to join the military, what are you going to be asked to do? At a basic level, you might be asked to do a particular job, but what's the overall aim? Dying for your country in the, sure, but in what aim? Say louder. To kill people. Yeah. The aim of the American military, I'm picking awfully on America here, but fuck me, they're bigger than me. The aim of the American military is to maintain America's singular power as the world's premier superpower. How does it do this? Well, there's a perceived threat over there with those people. Let's go bomb the fuck out of them. Yeah? Look, a village of women and children. Let's fucking kill them. They're a threat. You might think I'm being awful. Yeah, well, try being a village of women and children somewhere who gets bombed by Americans, see how that feels. Am I anti-American? No, not particularly, but this is true. So, we have a representation that embodies a particular set of ideologies. I think, well, okay, so how does it have power, Nathan? Well, all representations like this enter into what we call a discourse. Images like this, words like the ones I'm speaking right now, are discourses about power. This image projects a particular discourse about power. Discourses act to legitimize the ideologies of the ruling class in society. So, this representation has what we call a discursive function. It tells us something about the nature of power in America and how, if I was an American citizen, I would need to act in order to realize that power system or be part of it. If I'm a 21-year-old in America thinking, how do I get on? How do I show that I embody some of the key ideological positions of the ruling class? Well, one of the ways I can do that is by following the advice that this man gives in many posters and images which are put up around the state. Join up. But if I don't join up, at least what I've got to do is support American military interventions in the American military. I can't be seen as an outsider to that. I can't dissent against it. Ideologies are extremely important in any society. And the ideology of the ruling class is even more important because the ideology of the ruling class is usually that thing which structures a particular society. You might think, well, that's a hell of a lot to go through in the first 5 minutes of the lecture, and it is true. That is a very, very important beginning to lecture. In fact, this, more than anything, is the one thing you are going to use over the next 3 years, ideological critical reading. Especially if you do journalism, because that's an incredibly important thing. Second thing you might ask is, are these your ideas, Leighton? No, they are not. Can anyone tell me whose ideas these are? Indeed. Buy it too. As Matthew said, these ideas do not come from me, they come from a German sociologist, economist and philosopher called Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx has got a bad name. Marxism, as a political ideology, has an extremely bad name, and with good reason as well. Some of the worst crimes of the 20th century were committed in the name of Marxism. However, we're not going to particularly look at the shit show that was 20th century Marxism in this lecture. Instead, what we're going to focus on is Marx's critique of ownership. Because the ideology of the ruling class in Western societies, and we can extend that to pretty much any society in the world, comes from those who own the media. One of the most important determining factors of what ideologies are accepted as being dominant in a society is who owns the media and therefore who owns the means to legitimize ideologies in society. Because the role of media in a society, in particular the mass media in a society, which is what we're going to focus on today, is to legitimize the ideas and beliefs of the ruling class in society. So I'm going to exemplify this today with one particular historical example in the second half of the lecture. I'm going to take you first of all through how we get to this position. And as I said, this is extremely important in terms of understanding how the broadcast media and mass media works. And even though we live in a digital age, these media still exist and still exert considerable power. I need to do the math. Okay, so we're going to look at Marx and Marxism. We're going to look at surplus labour and media. We're going to look at Marx's view of ideology, and we're going to do some ideological critique of this. Any questions so far? By a show of hands, how many of you have studied Marxism before? Okay, 75%. Fantastic. We're going to go deeper than what you've done before. Okay, so here are the two key figures. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Marx, if anyone's ever tried to read Karl Marx, just Karl Marx's work on his own, say Das Kapital or the Grundrisse, what you will note is that Karl Marx is a horrible writer. Reading, for example, Das Kapital, his major work is a bit like being pummeled over the head with a manhole cover for several hours continuously. It's grim, his prose is turgid, and his ideas are quite frankly poorly illustrated. Shame, because he's got some good things to say. Engels, next to him there, fixed a lot of those problems. Engels was a wealthy factory owner, which is kind of weird when you think about Karl Marx, and he helped Marx actually write in a way which is more approachable. So probably Marx's most famous work is the Communist Manifesto. Those ideas are Karl Marx's, but it was written by Friedrich Engels. Does anyone know where Karl Marx lived?
Pretty sure he lived in, I know he lived in Berlin at one point.
So he was born in Berlin.
I was born in
Yeah.
Berlin.
Does anyone know, well, maybe I'll change it from lived. Does anyone know where Karl Marx died and is buried? Indeed. Highgate Cemetery in North London, and there was Karl Marx's grave. Lots of people do go there. Lived in North London most of his adult life. The reason why he lived in England in particular, and he moved around England quite a bit, did most of his famous work in Manchester. Well, let's throw it open. What was going on in England at that point in time between 1818 and 1883, which wasn't happening in the rest of the world? The Industrial Revolution. Marx was interested in the Industrial Revolution and the industrialization of society, and what industrialization was doing to normal people in society. What Marx proposed was that industrialization was creating two new classes of people. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, you had people who owned stuff, the aristocracy, and people who didn't own stuff, the peasantry, if you like. For Marx, the Industrial Revolution brought new classes into society. He called one the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie were a group of people who owned things like factories, mills, etc. People who Marx said owned the means of production in a society. And the rest of the people, the proletariat, were the people who worked in those facilities. So you had people who owned stuff and people who traded their time and labour for wages to those people who owned stuff. Those basically are the two classes of people that Marx saw emerging from the Industrial Revolution. Because of this, Marx was extremely interested in, well, I guess both types of people, but more interested, I think it's fair to say, in the proletariat and how could the proletariat change their situation. Because the situation of the proletariat in industrial society was pretty grim. You had poor wages, long working hours, poor life expectancy, disease, famine, you know, alcoholism. Sounds a lot like me right now, quite frankly. Thank you for being that. I'm so okay for me to say that. Marx was interested in the plight of these people, how they might better their position, how indeed we could change society so it wasn't so unequal. Because what Marx saw fundamentally about industrial society was that it was radically unequal. A few people owned a lot and therefore controlled society, whereas the vast majority of people owned very little and had no control over society all their lives. Marx saw this as a problem. Why should this lot of people control everything and this lot of people have nothing? That's not very nice. Those of you who are astute will note that we are in the same bloody debates today. Indeed, a report came out this morning from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, JRF, which stated that 4 million people in the United Kingdom are now destitute. Not just living in poverty, but destitute. Does anyone know what destitute means? Has anyone heard the word before? Some people have heard the word. Does anyone want to venture a guess at what destitute means? Okay, well, let me give you a visual example, right? Here's like rich, here's poor, down there is destitute. Destitute is the position where like, you ain't even poor at that point. You're beyond poor. In technical terms, you're fucked if you're destitute. You literally have nothing. 4 million people apparently, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, in the United Kingdom, population of 67 million, are destitute. That is something which wasn't even the case when Marx was writing. So inequality is still very, very important. Then, Marx wanted to understand why, in many ways, people accepted this situation. Why is it that people would accept being so poor compared to this one other group of people? What, you know, what's wrong? Basically, if you want to have an idea of where Marx was coming from, think of it. Marx was looking at society and thinking, what's wrong with these people? That was the fundamental question he was asking. Why would anyone accept this? Why would somebody do a 12-hour shift in an ironworks for a pittance of pay when the person who owns the ironworks lives in a castle with the most unimaginable wealth possible? And doesn't even pay you properly. Instead, that person doesn't give you money, they give you tokens to spend in shops that that person who owns the ironworks actually owns. So there's no money being spent at all. Everything goes back to them. I think that's a weird situation. If you drive 20 miles from here to a town called Merthyr Tydfil, that's exactly how that town operated. Merthyr Tydfil, up until the middle part of the 19th century, was the Merthyr represents. Merthyr Tydfil, up until the mid part of the 19th century, was the largest iron-producing town on the planet. Not in Wales, not in the UK, anywhere in the world. And there were 4 major ironworks in Merthyr, largest of which being Cyfarthfa Ironworks. Lord Cyfarthfa himself was the prototype of the capitalist bastard. Hated his workers, Richard Crawshay, despised them. You can go actually, I don't know, see Crawshay's grave?
I went to the school of the castle. So.
Oh, did you? Yeah, okay. Crawshay's grave is up towards Pontsdyca Beck, in a little church, and there's still 3 concrete slabs over the top of it.
Yeah.
When he got buried, they made sure that nobody could come and take his bones away and burn them again. That's how much of a bastard this man was and how hated he was. And all he says in his gravestone is, God forgive me. Crawshay would make his workers work incredibly long hours, incredibly dangerous working conditions with no safety, no health safety didn't exist back then. And instead of paying them, he would give them tokens to use in his shops. So in effect, he was paying them nothing. because all the wages he gave back to them, he took back in that system. They lived in absolute squalor and poverty in the middle of Merthyr. Most of those houses have now fortunately been demolished. It'd be nice historically if you would not see how these people lived. And Tollshaven wasn't unusual. And Marx genuinely looked at this kind of situation in the 1830s and thought, what? What is going on? And Marx's analysis of what was going on is extremely important in how we understand the media today, still. So when we talk about a Marxist approach to media, we are not necessarily going into an analysis of how societies in the 20th century adopted Marx's political ideas for the structuring of society. Instead, what we are looking at primarily is an economic analysis of media. The approach that we use is called political economy. So please write that approach down. You will see it used very, very often, and other lecturers will say political economy to you. And what I want you to do is when they say that, you know what they mean. Now, originally, the aim of Marxism was to bring about a classless society based on common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange in a society. So, politically, what Marxism is all about is to remove this two-class system in a society. To get rid of the idea that stuff can be owned, and instead have ownership for all. This, in many ways, is the foundation of communism in the 20th century. The problem with communism in the 20th century, beautiful idea, doesn't work, unfortunately. But there you go, like a lot of ideas. You know, like that idea I had on the weekend of drinking 12 pints on Saturday. Beautiful idea, just does not work, unfortunately. I'm 44 now, it can't be done. But the Swans lost, and I was really depressed. So, what are you going to do? Therefore, what is important here is this idea, for us as media scholars, is this idea of means of production. By means of production, what Marx is referring to is who owns the stuff that produces other stuff. Now, in the time he was doing his analysis, he's talking really about factories. Who owns the factories? Who owns the steel mills? Who owns the coal mines? Who owns the giant copper smelting plants that was the foundation of this city, Swansea, which, like Merthyr, Swansea was the biggest copper producing on the planet until the 20th century. Who owns that stuff? Swansea, it was largely the Vivian and Dillon families. They became very, very rich. Bastards. Me, not from that kind of background, so I ain't got no money. Damn it. Why didn't my great-great-great-great-grandparents own one of these things? And I'd be sitting like a rich bitch. I wouldn't have to be doing this shit at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'd be getting up at 12. Hate my life. We are interested in the means of production. Now, in terms of media, we are not talking about factories. We are talking about what? Well, what would be means of production with regards to media?
Or who controls the media?
How?
Who is in charge of like producing it?
To be more specific, you're on the right path.
Maybe like the newspaper companies and broadcasting companies.
Who owns the newspapers? Who owns the news companies? But not just this. Who owns television networks? Who owns streaming services? Who owns social networks? Who owns film distribution companies? Who owns film studios? Yeah? These kind of things. Now, in the digital age, we tend to talk more about who owns the platforms the content is distributed on, rather than who owns the newspapers and has a journalism lecturer yet told you that you need to read a newspaper every day? I always laugh when I hear that, because I reckon I haven't actually held a physical newspaper for a decade. And it's like, who the fuck is
I had a meeting like in February this year. I've been involved in a team that's been redesigning the GCSE for media studies in Wales. And it's like there was like one expert, me, and then a bunch of teachers. And they were saying, what we really need to keep on the syllabus is magazine covers, an analysis of magazine covers. So I turned around and said, okay, that's really interesting. Can you tell me of one 14 to 16-year-old who's ever bought a magazine? And they're like, I said, do your 14 to 16-year-olds read magazines? No. Fuck you doing, giving them magazine covers to animals. They won't even know a magazine cover if you rolled it up and smashed them in the teeth with it. What the hell's the matter with it? Things change, but actually the idea that somebody owns this does not change.
So we have to like actually like buy a newspaper.
Well, I think the idea is, that if you're a journalism student, you should be buying a newspaper every day. I don't even know where you buy newspapers anymore, to be quite honest with you, but there you go. It's like most of the shops. I know Tesco by me sells newspapers because I go in there every morning when I'm walking into work and I take like other newspapers and put them on top of the Daily Mail so nobody buys it. And sometimes I just pick up the Daily Mail and just like strew them across the floor. But that's because I don't like the Daily Mail, right? Means of production varies according to the media type, but we are still interested in this notion of means of production. Usually and traditionally, means of production means something like this. A means to industrially produce something. A bit like, Henry J. Ford in 1905 when he owned the Ford Motor Company in Detroit. He owned the factory where those cars were built. He owned the means of production. And he became rich on the basis of selling cars at a certain point, but because he owned the means of production of it, he could sell them for more than each car was actually worth. He realized a profit on each of those. So what we look for in a political economy critique is who owns how this is produced. If you're going to do a political economy critique of Instagram, the question you need to ask is, who owns Instagram? And therefore, how does Instagram as a platform legitimize the ideas of those people who own that platform? Simple so far? I mean, I'm not going to tell you the answer to that because that will ruin next week. So I've got to keep something in reserve here, right? There's a whole theme going through this module. There's a thread. Can't go too far ahead. Now, as I said, the means of production, the aim of Marxism is to bring about a class of society based on common ownership of that. That's traditionally been how Marxist societies have been structured as well, but we don't have to worry about the rights and wrongs of that here, and there are significant arguments to suggest that that actually is a wrong-headed notion, that common ownership of the means of production is actually a way of stagnating societies, not developing them. We don't have to get into the ins and outs of that here. But what we do at least need to appreciate is that a political economy approach is going to look at the idea that there isn't a common ownership of the means of production. So what it's going to look at is the effects of ownership being concentrated in a particular set of people and what that means for a society. This has fundamental questions, therefore, about the nature of democracy, about the nature of equality, about the nature of how societies are structured, and what ideas are seen as important in society. I mean, as a preemption of this, tell me what the word patriarchy means.
Classes.
Who said? Classes. Much more. Much more.
It's when society is dominated by males.
Society dominated by males or men. Patriarchal society is a society which is dominated by women. At the expense of who?
Women.
Yeah, women. Patriarchal societies are societies which are structured around the needs and requirements of men at the detriment of women. Usually, a society is structured roughly 50-50, men and women. Some people don't fall into either category, God bless them, but roughly speaking, it's usually about 50-50 split. A patriarchal society says that 50%, they're the ones which should be for. The other 50%, fuck them. Just about every society on earth is a patriarchal society. You might think, oh, fuck me, that's not good. I said, well, no, because when you look at who owns the means of production in any given society on earth, you'll find, nearly exclusively, it's men. And therefore, it is the ideologies of the dominant class in society, i.e. men, who get to decide what ideologies get legitimised by the things that they own, the media. And therefore we live in a perpetual system where patriarchal ideas are continually recycled in society to maintain the dominance of men. Good, isn't it? I mean, it suits me, no matter. I wouldn't be here without patriarchal society. Genuinely. I can acknowledge that. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a horrible thing. I think it holds society back. I think our society would be much, much better if it was not patriarchal. But it is. We need to acknowledge that. The reasons being that traditionally and today, the ownership of the means of production in society is concentrated in the hands of men, not women. And therefore, ideologically, men look to maintain their position of dominance in a given society by presenting ideologies which state that men are better at doing this sort of thing than women. And media works to legitimise those ideologies by presenting any woman that is strong and independent and, you know, has different ideas and doesn't want to be dominated by men as, what happens when a woman presents herself as this? What is she labelled as? Feminist is one good word to use it, but I was thinking of something different. Britney Spears has just, this morning, released a biography where she has outlined in some detail how strong independent women who have their own ideas get treated in a patriarchal society. What is one word that we can use, or two words if you want, that can be used to describe Britney Spears in popular parlance? I'll give you them. Crazy bitch. The dominant mode of describing Britney Spears in the media over the past 20 years has been crazy bitch. Well, I wonder why. Somebody wants to take control of her own life, control of her own image, control away from men who were ruling her life, record executives, her own fucking father. As soon as she does anything which goes against that, oh, she's gone nuts. 20 years this woman has been portrayed as being, there's nothing wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with her at all.
Well, the videos are a bit strange. The dancing in lives.
If you'd had 20 years of being told you're crazy, you might dance a bit crazy on Instagram as well. Dancing with a knife? But on Wine Street and show you that tomorrow. So, you know, that's not that crazy. Depends where you're coming from. But, believe me, if I was Britney after all that, I wouldn't be dancing with those knives. I'd be taking them and using them on people. So, it is a classic example of how ideologies of a ruling class work in society. Here is somebody, it's like, this commodity we've created wants to take control of her own destiny. Oh, God, no, we're not going to have that. She's fucking nuts. Classic tale. How is that possible? Well, it is possible because those media outlets, those platforms, etc., that discuss, i.e. create a discourse about Britney Spears, it is in their interest to legitimise discourses which present strong, independent, wealthy, capable women as being abnormal. being not on. At best, feminist. At worst, crazy. At worst. Listen, deep. Yeah, welcome to how the world works. Good now. Not good. So. Why was Marx particularly interested in this stuff? Well, Marx plotted that what happened in industrial society was a radical change. We went from the 18th century, the 1700s, to what was called cottage industries, to the industrialized age. Now, in the cottage industries, a person might work all day producing a garment. So they put their labor and time into the production of something, and then they would sell it. So what you have is what we call an exchange. Labor and time here, economic exchange here. And that economic exchange would match the labor and time that people put in. So basically, the time that you put in, the effort you put in, was realized in some kind of reward, right? And it was probably not a one-to-one sort of exchange, but nevertheless, you were directly rewarded for the labor you put in. With industrialization, in things like textile mills, your labor for a 10-hour shift result in 50 garments being made. So industrialization and the use of machinery, automation of production, meant that one person, instead of producing one garment, could now produce 50 things. Profit. Because the person who owned the factory is still only going to pay you the equivalent of the one thing. Anything made over that becomes what we call surplus value. So, a person has gone from realizing their labor value, however much effort I put in here is how much I get rewarded, to I am being forced to put this much in, but I'm only being rewarded for one. All of that surplus value becomes profit for the person who owns the factory itself. They're not doing any work. They're sitting in the office, smoking a fat cigar, getting rich as shit off people's labour. And you haven't just got one person working in your factory, you've got hundreds. So you're producing loads and loads of surplus value. And this is how people who own things get rich. The story of capitalism. Now, what Marx noted is that this isn't great for people. What he said was that people become alienated. You become alienated from your labour itself. Previously you put work in, you were rewarded for it. Now you put shit ton of work in, and you're not rewarded for it. You get a little bit of the slice, and the rest goes to somebody who sits in a fat office, smoking their fat cigar with their fat glass of whiskey, beating a child or something. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not doing good things. This is all a bad scene. Marx thought this was really bad. We are alienated from what we do because we don't realise the actual rewards of the labour that we put in. Instead, we get a little piece of it. This is why, you shouldn't buy trainers from like Nike, because those $80 that you spent on the trainers, the little Indonesian kid who made them earned 29 pence making those. And I think they should earn more because the stitching on those trainers is pretty fucking good. One thing I think we teach the wrong things. How is it that like kids in like Indonesia and places like that can sew things so good? Why isn't kids in Wales doing this? Kids in Wales can do shit. Right? I see kids outside the shop down the street from me. They're thick as fuck. They can't do anything, right? Get in my way all the time. I have to hit them, and the police come. It's a bad thing, right? And I'm not into it. Why don't we get them all making trainers? We could all grow fat on that stuff. Nah, bloody do-gooders in society. You can't treat kids like that. Makes me mad, it does. Think how amazing our lives could be if we learned how to make trainers at 8. We could be making really good trainers now. instead of sitting here and listening to this shit. Which is ironically related to the whole thing. So, we have the principle here of surplus value. You might think, oh well, why do factory owners employ children? It's like children are even cheaper than adults, you know, so you can earn more surplus value. So, surplus value is a very simple equation. Okay? Let's say you have to previously make 10 t-shirts in order to keep yourself alive for one day. In an industrial situation, you're going to make more than that. You still get your daily thing for 10 t-shirts, but anything over that is surplus value. And this is how capitalists become rich. You might think, okay, well, I'm really struggling at this point, Leighton. This is very interesting. But what the hell has surplus value got to do with anything with the media? Well, surplus labour produces surplus value. Okay? That's the key thing. Surplus labour. And this is going to be the real sting for a lot of people in the room right now. And it is this. In terms of media, we are the surplus labour. All that media you consume, which you do all the freaking time, is a form of surplus labour for the platform that you consume it on. This is not my idea. This idea first originated in 1976 with American sociologist Dallas Smythe, who himself was a Marxist theorist. He called this the audience commodity. As an audience of media, we are doing work. Our watching, reading, and listening is a form of labour that is sold to advertisers as profit. We watch things, read things, and listen to things. We don't get paid for doing that. In fact, very often, we pay for the privilege of doing that. And then all that information about our watching habits, listening habits, reading habits is scalped up, made into a little profile, and sold to the actual customers of media organisations, which are the advertisers that then sell us products on those platforms. That is how the media works. So you might think, well, how is the media subject to a Marxist analysis? It is in this way. The media produces a product. That product is not the news programme, not the film, not the newspaper, not the song, not the podcast, not the web page. It is us. We are the thing that is produced to be sold for profit. This is how media has worked since the time of the Industrial Revolution. Audiences are bundled up and sold in order to make a profit. We are the surplus value. TikTok, with its hours and hours of mind-rotting shit on my For You page. 3 fucking hours yesterday afternoon I was watching TikTok all in my office. I was supposed to be at work. So I was tired, so I'd done a lecture and I was knackered. And it was like 1 o'clock and I looked at it, it was 4. I was like, I haven't done anything for hours. My phone is dead and all I've been doing is watching retro games videos on TikTok. My life could not get any worse at this point. Can somebody please, could God please strike me down right now? I have nothing to live for. I have made TikTok money doing that. TikTok has been continually profiling me, analysing what I'm watching, for how long I'm looking at it for, what my reactions to it are, continually refining my data presence on that platform, and then selling me, and every 5th video is like, an advert or some piece of shit that I don't want. At the moment, TikTok is obsessed with the idea that I want a new drainer for my, washing up. I got a fucking dishwasher. What are they on about? I don't need that shit. It was an air fryer before. So I don't want the fucking air fryer. Leave me alone, like. Damn it. So, if we want an answer about how the Marxist approach works here, this is how. But most familiar to those of you who have studied Marxism previously will be this image. The base and superstructure model of society. This is an extrapolation of Marx's ideas in Das Kapital. And it's a very, very simple model. What Marx argues here is that thanks to the differentiation between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, we have a model of society which is both based in superstructure. And if you like, we can map this on to those two basic classes here. We have the base, which is so we have the base, which represents the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat, which, if you like, represents the whole of society, but primarily the proletariat. This model is incredibly simple. The base consists of the economic structure of society, the material means of production, distribution, and exchange. So basically, what Marx is saying is that the base of society, we have those guys who own stuff. The media company owners. That base shapes and maintains the superstructure, which in very simple terms means culture. I've got here art, family, culture, religion, philosophy, law, media, politics, science, education. The ideological content of a society. So, let's take it back one step again. Those people who own stuff, own the means of production, create and maintain the ideological content of a given society. That ideological content is the culture of a society. So Marx's argument is that our culture is a product of who is economically dominant in society, who owns all the stuff. Those people who don't own the stuff, the vast majority, are not contributors to the culture. They are consumers of the culture. In the superstructure, all these other things, art, family, culture, religion, philosophy, law, media, politics, science, education, and a whole bunch of other stuff, works to legitimize the ideologies of the base of society, hence maintains and shapes the base. So the cultural aspect of things legitimizes what goes on at the base of society, and onwards it goes in a circular fashion. Culture legitimizes the ideologies at the base. The base pushes out more culture to legitimize more of these ideas, and so on and so on. So any given culture is a system by which an elite in society at the base push out all sorts of cultural stuff which legitimizes their ideologies. We agree with that stuff, we accept its ideas, and that gives further legitimization to the people who actually run things at the bottom. So we tacitly agree with the structure of our society. Any questions? I think, I don't do that. I said, you're fucking sitting here. Society, well, the people in charge of society say to us, in order to move forwards in life, you need to get a degree. You need to go to university. So you go to university. You sit in vast, alienating spaces like this, listening to boring white pieces of shit witter on for an hour with no fucking break until they go, because they're dying. Yeah? That's basically how it works, right? And you agree with the shit that they say, because if you don't, you fail your assignments. So you might be like, oh yeah, I'm going to write this, but I don't really agree with it. But by the end of the 3 years, you bought it, hook, line and sinker. You've also bought yourself between 40 and 50,000 pounds worth of debt. And that's almost more important. Because that means what? When you're in 40, 50 grand worth of debt, what do you instantly try to do? Pay it how? How to pay it back? Work. You work. You go find a job. Now what things that you can have to stop doing when you work? This is more of an abstract question and gives you some indication of how much of a psychopath I was as a teenager. Drink excessively, yeah, something that I used to do at a very high level, you know, on a global scale. I was pretty impressive, that kind of thing. Setting fire to shit. I have not set fire to something in a long time. You know, there are old women walking around Swansea who owe their existence to the fact of this. Because otherwise, I would have torched them years ago. Setting fire to old women is class. Right? Especially the ones who've got them buns. So they tend to go up fastest. Thieving shit. I don't thieve shit anymore. I used to go in Tesco in town all the time and rob stuff all the time. It's victimless crime because the fuck. Tesco makes like 10 billion quid a minute or something. So I'm nipping a Kit Kat. They're not going to care. They don't care. Alright? I do occasionally nip stuff in Tesco. I really needed one of them USB storage devices. You know, I can't fuck to pay for this. It's going in my pocket. It's a victimless crime. Nobody cares, alright? Tesco doesn't care. I stole a Kit Kat from Costco the other day. Nobody cares. Alright? But you can't do that to the extent that I used to doing as a kid. Alright? And that you can't be done anymore, right? Because now I've got responsibilities. Because I've bought into this shit. Right? Now I've got a house. I've got a mortgage to pay every month. I've got gas and electric bills. I've got life insurance, fucking life insurance. I've trashed my liver. What idiots are giving me life insurance? I don't know. Fools. However, I have to pay it because I have a mortgage, so I have to have life insurance. Oh, shit. It's not good. It's not good for the soul. Nice. Superstructure has crushed me. I am now a husk of the human being that I once was. The rebellious individual who used to, you know, instead of thinking of drinking whiskey was a good idea, so I don't really snort it instead. Maybe that'll get us drunk quicker. That was a good idea. The individual who thought things like that were a good way to exist is dead. And instead, I have become a good little boy. And that is the lesson of university, my friends. That is why you are being loaded with 50 grand's worth of debt for 3 years of the university degree. Because when you finish, you're going to have to stop the shit that you're doing. All that mad crap that you're up to, because you're going to have to do your 9 to 5, be good, get the fucking financing deal for the car, get your nice little hybrid, and this shit, right? That's how society works. Or you can stay on the margins and be poor. Be one of those destitute fuckers I was talking about earlier. 4 million people in destitution in this country, not playing the game. The whole of society, therefore, is structured like a game. Ideas come from here, we either buy into them or we don't. If we do buy into them, if we internalise the ideological positions, we will find a level of material success in society. It won't be as much as these people have, and in fact we'll be contributing further to the success of people at the base through our activities because we have legitimised their ideological position. I've just depressed everyone now with your choice, haven't I? Yeah, never mind. You get over it, you're fine. Do you know, like in 2 hours time, you'll be like, what was he saying? I wasn't listening anyway, so it'll be fine, don't worry about it. Right, we'll take a break again, because I know we've gone a little over. 5 minutes tops, because we've got a lot of things to get to in seconds, right?